Hello, I'm Sarah, the Windy City Baker, and this is the third chapter in this series on pound cake. Today, I'm going to figure out which store-bought pound cake is the best. Join me as we journey down the baking rabbit hole. First, we're going to do Sara Lee. So here we have our Sara Lee cake. I'm not going to lie, I was a little surprised when I took it out of the box. This isn't exactly what I remembered from my childhood, and it doesn't exactly look like what a pound cake normally looks like. So pick it up here. So if you look at the top, there's really no crack at the top, and a crack is pretty typical of pound cakes. Now, you can make pound cakes without one, but what this is telling me is that the pound cake was probably baked at a fairly low temperature, so the crust didn't really have time to set before the interior started to bake, and that's what causes the crack on the top of the pound cake. All the way around, this cake is very soft, which isn't really that surprising considering that pound cakes in general tend to get soft as they are sitting kind of on a shelf, or even if you've made one at home, right? The next day, the crust on a pound cake softens. So this, granted it was in the freezer and then it had to thaw, so there probably is some condensation that goes along with that as well, which affects kind of the softness of the cake. The other thing that I don't quite understand when I'm looking at it is these huge kind of air bubbles. So the cake itself is baked in the foil that you get it in at the grocery store. So I guess there must have been air bubbles on the side, and then the bubbles popped and left those in the crust. It is a little bit unusual. It almost looks like something picked it up and like put it somewhere, as opposed to how a cake normally bakes. Also with the color, the sides have a really nice warm golden brown color. This is really pretty. That is even all the way around. The top is, for lack of a better term, not nice looking. The color is very dull. It's a very kind of dull brown. It's not very warm. It is even across the whole top, but if I'm being honest, this cake does not look particularly appetizing. Let's take a slice and see how it tastes on the inside. Okay, it's sliced through really nicely. This is probably the most even I've seen in a pound cake in terms of the interior texture. It is very moist, almost leaving an indent when I'm touching it with my finger fairly lightly. So that's telling me that it's very, very moist inside. The crumb does look dense, which is what you would expect with a pound cake. So those air bubbles are really small and tight, and it seems fairly tender when you kind of rub up against the edge. You're getting crumbs coming off. Let's taste it to see what the flavor is like. The first flavor that you get is vanilla, and it's fairly strong, and it is very rich. So the taste of it honestly is much better than the way that it looks. This actually is a fairly good tasting cake. It's lacking just a little bit in the texture, so it's really soft when you're eating it, and I personally prefer a pound cake that just has a little more body when I'm eating it. Now, this one would absolutely be good on its own if you kind of like this really soft texture. It is a little bit greasy, although I'm not really noticing kind of a film on my tongue, which frequently you would have if you have a cake that's made with a lot of oil. So I'm not really noticing that, even though my fingers are indicating that there's a lot of grease in this cake. From a flavor point of view, it's actually okay. If you'd like to learn a little more about Sara Lee pound cakes and how the company revolutionized the food industry, watch the first video in this series on the history of pound cake. I'll put a link in the description box below. Let's take a slice of our Betty Crocker. So before I show the inside of this, I'm going to talk just a little bit about the outside. So we do have a nice hard crust on the outside from where it baked, and you can also see there's a crack down the middle, which is exactly what we would expect from a pound cake. The pound cake the crust usually cooks first as it's baking, so the air has to escape somewhere, and it sort of finds a crack. Now, the color that we have, it is a fairly consistent brown around the entire cake. All of the sides got browned, the bottom is browned, but I will say that it's kind of a dull brown. It isn't really a nice and warm golden brown. It is kind of a blah looking color, but it cooked really evenly all the way around. So here's our slice. It cut through very nicely. So if we look inside, we see that we have a fairly dense pound cake here. The air bubbles are really small and kind of tight together. We do see some other larger holes, which are called tunneling, and that's where air is trying to get out of the cake, and it can kind of cause those holes throughout. But it is also pretty tender, so you can see how the crumb kind of pulls away and breaks apart. That's pretty indicative of a tender cake. So it feels moist to the touch, and it isn't leaving a lot of grease on my finger, which is nice. Let's take a bite. This cake has a flavor that's very familiar to a lot of the box cake mixes that you might buy from the supermarket. It has kind of that fake vanilla flavor, but overall it tastes nice. It is a little bit dry on the inside, so it's kind of sucking some of the moisture out of my mouth as I was chewing on it. There's a possibility that I might have overbaked it, although I baked it until a toothpick came out clean and had it set, so that I would check it earlier on, and then kept checking every couple of minutes right towards the end. So I don't think that it's really due to being overbaked. This cake would be one that if you wanted to add fruit that have been macerating and it has kind of those juices that are with it, that would be really good with this cake. That would help kind of give it a little bit more moisture, and I think the flavor would go really nicely with it. It does have a little more body in the cake slice, so it doesn't feel like you're eating air. Next is Entenmann's. This is the first fresh pound cake that we're looking at that can be bought in the grocery store. I also talk about Entenmann's in my history of pound cake video, so check that out after you finish watching this one. Now we're going to be cutting a slice out of our Entenmann's pound cake, and we're going to take a bite to see what it tastes like. So I'm just going to peel the wrapper off. It's essentially like a muffin wrapper or a cupcake wrapper. The outside of the cake has kind of a dark golden brown on the top, and on the sides we do have some color. Let me take this off here so that you can see. We have some color, but where the wrapper has sort of adhered and pushed into the cake, there's no color there. Another thing to note is that it is very soft and almost sticky. And that can happen with pound cake just in general after it's been sitting, but this is a boxed product that sits on the shelves, so that's what we're looking at here. There's no kind of hard crust, it's soft and greasy. Let's take a slice. It's very easy to slice, and then we can look at the crumb on the inside. So for the most part, we have small bubbles that are very tight and dense. We do have a couple of air bubbles, and likely, or kind of like tunneling that's happening in the cake, and likely what happened is that because this cake is pretty dense, the air was having trouble kind of getting out, and as it makes its way, it causes these larger holes in the cake. Now, because the cake is so soft and there's a lot of grease, it's likely that this is a very moist cake. But let's take a bite. It's very spongy, almost like angel food cake in the way that it's feeling as I'm putting it on my fork, which is not generally what pound cake is like. Normally pound cake has some kind of heft behind it when you're cutting into it and when you're taking a bite. So this is a little lighter than what I typically expect in a pound cake. It tastes good. I think I'm getting a vanilla flavor and definitely some richness, but mostly it just kind of tastes like air. There isn't any sort of caramelized flavor from the crust. Everything is very subtle. They're not getting much flavor from this at all, and it definitely was soft, like angel food cake almost. It melted in my mouth as I was eating it. So if you're looking for something that is neutral in flavor, I think that's a good way to describe this cake. It's very neutral, and would pair with kind of fruits or something else that you're putting on it. I would say that would be ideal. This by itself, it's just a little bland. Another thing that I'm kind of noticing as I'm eating it is that it has sort of an artificial flavor that is with it too. That isn't it isn't like the clean flavors that you would get if you were making this cake at home. I'm just checking the list here to see what the ingredients say. Oh, and it does say here, artificial flavors. Another thing that I'm noticing as I'm looking through the list of ingredients, the all butter loaf cake is not actually made with all butter. So butter is the the fifth ingredient. However, it also has vegetable oil in it too. So I guess a little bit of misleading in the all butter cake. Now we're looking at our last pound cake. This one I got from a local bakery. Now, while a bakery isn't always included when people refer to something as being store-bought, I'm including it since I purchased it from a store and I didn't make it in my home. Now, I don't often buy baked goods since I make them all the time at home, but when I do buy them, I like to try local bakeries rather than buying them from the grocery store. Not many people know this, but a lot of grocery stores sell fresh baked goods in their bakery section, but most of them have been sitting in the freezer for weeks or even months before getting put out. So when you buy from a bakery, you're likely getting a fresher product without any added preservatives. So here we have the pound cake from our local bakery. You can see on the outside that they have this beautiful golden brown color around the entire cake. Let me pick it up here so that you can see it as well. All the way through. It also has a very hard crust, and it's gonna be great, I can tell. It also is baked in a bundt pan as well, which is different from the other ones that we've seen so far, which have all been in a loaf pan. So we might get some differences in the way that they're cooked, because with a bundt pan, you have kind of a piece of metal tube in the middle that helps to cook the cake more evenly, since you have a smaller amount of batter in between each of those metal sides. So we'll see once we get inside the cake. Let's take a slice of this. When we're looking at the slice of cake, we see that we have a really beautiful crust around the outside, and this is the one that's nice and hard. So this is great when you're eating a pound cake because you get kind of that textural contrast between the crunchy outside and the really soft and moist interior. With this one as well, you can absolutely tell that it is moist. When you're touching it with your finger, it gives a little bit, it's nice and soft, but it is still dense like a pound cake should be. We have kind of small air bubbles for the most part. Again, all of them have kind of had some larger bubbles, but most of the air bubbles that we're seeing are really kind of small and tightly packed together. And that's again what we're looking for when we're eating a pound cake. Let's get a taste of this. Okay, this is really, really good. It's super moist when you're eating it, which is really nice, and it isn't leaving any sort of like a coating on my tongue. So I know that there probably isn't oil in here, because a lot of times, or shortening can do that too. Shortening or oil frequently leave kind of a film on your tongue when you're eating it. So this is likely made all with butter. I am getting kind of a hint of some other flavor. Maybe there's some coconut oil in here, possibly. I'm not sure if that's the flavor that I'm tasting, but there's something other than just butter and vanilla. This is a really tasty cake. Okay, let me take one more bite to see if I can figure out kind of what that other flavor was. I actually think that the flavor that I'm tasting might be brown sugar. There is a little bit of kind of a caramel flavor. It could be that it's coming from the crust, but it could also be that it's coming from the actual cake. One thing to note is that the color of the interior is slightly darker than the color of some of the other pound cakes that we've seen, and kind of pound cakes that I've made in the past as well. So it is possible then that they're using brown sugar instead of granulated sugar, which is frequently the sugar that's used in pound cake recipes, that they switched it for brown sugar to give kind of a different taste to this product. Overall, this is delicious. Okay, so I've tasted each individual one. Now, what are my overall thoughts about what the best store-bought pound cake is? I've put these in order of what my tastes are. So lowest, I would say, is the Entenmann's pound cake. While it does look like one, especially with the crack, the texture is just, it's too soft for what I would want in a pound cake. And the flavor is a little more artificial. Second, I put for Sara Lee. I liked the flavor of Sara Lee's more than Entenmann's. I also liked it a little bit more than the Betty Crocker version, but in terms of its appearance and its texture, they both were on the lower end for me. Again, what I'm looking for in a pound cake is something that has that dense crumb, but doesn't just melt completely in my mouth because there's no structure to it. So these were definitely on the lower end of my list, and honestly, I probably wouldn't buy them. Betty Crocker was my third place. This one looks more like a pound cake that you would make at home. The actual structure of it is more robust. You know, when you put your fork in, it doesn't just collapse because it's so soft. Now, I liked Sara Lee's flavor more than I did Betty Crocker's flavor, but since you're making this at home, you have the luxury of being able to kind of doctor it and add some things to your own taste to kind of change that flavor up. So it didn't really have as strong of a vanilla flavor as Sara Lee or even the Entenmann's. So, you know, if you're making this one at home, you could add a little vanilla extract or go crazy and do some lemon zest or other kinds of zest in there, add some chocolate. Whatever you would want to kind of give it a little bit more flavor. It does have that typical store-bought kind of box mix taste, but it's a pretty good example of a pound cake. What I would suggest if you are going to be buying a pre-made pound cake is to go for probably a local bakery, right? With all of these products, you're getting something that has, in I think 100% of the cases, artificial ingredients, preservatives. All of them have preservatives in them, which make them, you know, shelf stable for a longer time, but that does affect the texture and the flavor. When you're buying something from a bakery, typically that isn't something that they're adding into their desserts, unless they're making things from box mixes. So I would highly suggest getting something from a bakery. This one was the absolute best example out of the ones that we tried today of what a pound cake is. The interior texture was fantastic. It was moist, it was tender, it does have that dense texture that you're looking for in a pound cake, and the outside has that really nice crisp crust that is delicious because it's been caramelized. So I would absolutely advise, and this one I'm saying unequivocally is the best store-bought pound cake that you can get. This one is second, third, and fourth. One other thing that I want to kind of go over, because I didn't talk about it when we were tasting each one individually, is the cost that goes into purchasing each of these, because that might influence opinions as well when talking about buying something from the store. So our Entenmann's pound cake costs $5.79. The Sara Lee one costs $4.49. Betty Crocker is $3.99, but keep in mind that with Betty Crocker you have to also buy additional ingredients like eggs and milk and butter to go into this too with the box mix, so it's a little bit more than the $3.99. And this one from the local bakery was definitely the most expensive at around $37. But when we compare its flavor and the quality to the others, it's definitely a good use of money. If though you're looking for a more kind of cost-conscious option, I would absolutely advise going with that Betty Crocker one and really adding a little bit to spice up that flavor and make it just a little bit better. but you're probably going to get the best tasting pound cake by making it yourself at home. And I'll leave some links for my pound cake recipes in the description box below. Well, those are my thoughts, but I'd love to hear what you think. Leave me a comment down below and let me know what your favorite store-bought pound cake is. If you missed any of the previous 2 videos, you can learn all about the history of pound cake by clicking on the video up here, or you can watch me make the first published pound cake recipe from 1747 by clicking on the video up here. If you enjoyed this video, you can hit the like button and subscribe so you can see all of my future videos. We have 2 more videos in this series where I will be looking at different ingredient substitutions and also developing my own pound cake recipe from scratch, so you won't want to miss those. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you the next time that we journey down the baking rabbit hole.